Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Grunberg, the Senior Vice President of Marketing for CM Group, Sailthru and Liveclicker's parent company. And on behalf of everyone at our organization, I'd like to welcome you to Chef Mark Forgione's Masterclass. Now, before Chef Forgione transports us all to Italy and teaches us his family's recipe for meatball pomodoro, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our family of brands. CM Group is the world's largest portfolio of email marketing solutions. And our goal in building this portfolio is to reintroduce trust into the technology buying process. As a marketer, I knew all too well the experience of being unsure as to whether or not the technology I'm buying can truly do everything that I'm being sold. And one of the reasons why I'm so proud to work at CM Group is because our portfolio strategy makes it possible for us to identify the right solution for every marketer based on their specific goals and their business's specific model. For those marketers, technologists, and leaders who are focused on engaging their audiences with highly personalized and relevant experiences, Sailthru and Liveclicker are two products built specifically for your needs. And while each of us has the ingredients in front of us tonight that we need to successfully cook alongside Chef Forgione, I also want to make sure that we all have the ingredients we need to successfully navigate the current economic environment. So here are a few recommendations directly from the strategy teams at Sailthru and Liveclicker. First, we highly recommend that you spend time reviewing and assessing your triggered email messaging, asking whether or not it's appropriate for the current environment, reviewing your welcome series, abandonment series, post-purchase series, re-engagement series, and more, and considering other ways that you might be able to humanize and personalize those communications. A few ideas like considering text-only emails for browse abandonment or cart abandonment versus highly produced and glossy email templates. Testing that to determine if that presents an opportunity for that humanization of email to better connect with your audiences. Also highly recommend considering moving forward any community-focused initiatives that your brand may have launched over the last 2 or 3 months and putting that in your welcome series to enforce the brand values that you have and really make that messaging timely to our current environment. Last and certainly not least is to be thinking about how you can incorporate real-time personalization to make sure that your content, shipping status, promotions, and other creative are truly the most up-to-date in every single email you send, regardless as to when your audience might be opening that email. Second is to be prioritizing your email strategy development for 2020. Now, we all know that Q4 is a particularly important time of year for retailers, grocers, and other industries. This year, more than ever, is that true. And we recommend that you start kicking off your holiday preparation now so that you have the right strategies and tactics in place to boost overall conversion, average order value, and revenue from email. This year, we recommend really leaning in and focusing on high-intent purchasers, using predictive analytics to identify who's likely to purchase so that you can capture those revenue opportunities. Using Sailthru, you can make sure your email marketing is then personalized to create a standout experience by incorporating personalized product recommendations based on whatever she's likely to be buying. Incorporating content that supports that predicted purchases before purchase and also post-purchase, as well as personalizing discounts and promotions for every individual in your customer file. With Liveclicker, you can pull and survey your audience to further enhance your profiling data. You can target top customers with user-generated content from social media, and you can use live video to communicate unique messages directly in email, and so much more. Both Sailthru and Liveclicker are publishing a host of performance and research-backed success guides specifically for retail, commerce, media, publishing, and other verticals. So be sure to check out sailthru.com and liveclicker.com to subscribe to our newsletters so that you always have these recommendations coming directly from us straight to your inbox. If you have any questions about CM Group, Sailthru, or Liveclicker, you can feel free to reach out to me at any time at jgrunberg@sailthru.com. Now, I'd like to introduce everybody to Chef Mark Forgione so that we can get cooking. Chef Forgione is the chef and owner of restaurant Mark Forgione and Peasant, and the co-owner and partner of Keyo. He won season 3 of Food Network's The Next Iron Chef at just 31 years old, making him the youngest winner in the show's history. Among many accolades, restaurant Mark Forgione was recognized with a glowing 2-star review in the New York Times and received a coveted Michelin star. Chef Forgione is also the author of Mark Forgione, Recipes and Stories from the Acclaimed Chef and Restaurant. Chef Forgione will be opening a coastal Italian restaurant in the Meatpacking District with his father, Larry Forgione, in partnership with the Butter Group sometime in 2020. In addition to numerous charities, Chef Forgione is a chef ambassador for Family Reach Foundation, Chefs for Kids Cancer, City Harvest, and Feeding America. We really appreciate Chef Forgione taking the time to spend with it tonight, the many things that he does to support the broader community, and thanks again to all of you for joining us. Cheers, everybody, and let's get cooking. Thank you.
Good evening, guys. How's everybody doing out there? It's nice to meet everybody. You know, this is the way we meet people now. I want to welcome you into my home, into my kitchen, into my new place of work. If you hear my little son running around, that's just kind of par for the course these days. But I'm so happy to be here. Jason, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And before we get to my family's recipes, I'm going to give you guys a little bonus recipe just to kind of get the night started. I don't know about you guys, but for me, happy hour has become a very kind of important thing in the household with my wife and I. And we're finding different ways to make drinks. So I think when the whole thing started, I was drinking a lot of Negronis, but I'm a little Negroni'd out. And I've kind of done different versions of them. And this is one of my favorites. I always like to drink a little bit of bitters before I have like an Italian meal with pasta or red sauce or meatballs or that kind of thing. So I'm going to do, it's basically like a half a Negroni. All right. I'm going to take 2 parts gin. And you're going to hear me say this a bunch throughout the rest of the night. If you want to add more gin, add less gin. If you want to, like, whatever you want to do, this is just how I like it. 2 parts gin. And then just a little bit of bitters. You can use Aperol, Campari. There's a whole slew of, kind of smaller market ones out there now too. And that's all I do. I do a couple big ice cubes. I give it a stir. And this is what I like to drink before I have my meal. All right. So we're going to start this off the right way with a toast. This is all the frontline workers, everybody out there that's really working, doing what they can to keep us all safe, and hopefully we can all go back to normal soon. All right, so let's have some fun tonight. We're going to do some meatballs with pomodoro and polenta. All right. Well, today's what? Thursday, right? So it's Thirsty Thursday, right? Or at least that's what it would be, right? All right, so as I just said, tonight I'm going to kind of, as I've already welcomed you into my house, I'm also going to welcome you into like kind of a family recipe. So, I kind of grew up in a family of cooks and chefs, and my parents met at culinary school. And, one of the questions that I get asked all the time, what's your death row meal, or what's your favorite thing in the world to eat, and all that kind of stuff. And, my top 5 for sure, my mother's meatballs are in there. And I don't know if it's something about nostalgia. I don't know if it's the actual flavor. But to this day, she hasn't made them for me in a while. But to this day, I still think about them when people ask me that question. So to get started on the meatball, and sorry, before we get started with the recipes, I want to make sure that everybody that's watching understands that this is an interactive situation, all right? So while I'm cooking and while I'm showing you things, I'll try to keep the pace so that you guys can keep up. But if you don't have a panic attack. It's no big deal. I want you guys to be doing this at home and having fun and taking your time. I don't want anybody cutting themselves or burning themselves. But again, we're going to do this together. Throughout the entire thing, if there's questions that you have, please just let me know. All right. It can be about the recipe. It can be about the restaurants. It can be about my personal life. It can be about anything. All right. If you just feel like talking, let me know. And I'll try to respond while we're doing this. All right. So to get started with the meatball, the first thing we're going to do is not the meatball. We're actually going to do the sauce. And you'll see why when we get to it. So I want you to make sure that you have all the recipes, all the ingredients for the recipe for the Pomodoro tomato sauce ready to go. All right, so you got to have the San Marzano tomatoes, your extra virgin olive oil, some garlic, red pepper flakes, a little bit of basil, and if you don't have salt and pepper out on your counter right now, grab the salt and pepper because we're going to use it throughout the entire thing. All right. So the first step in the Pomodoro sauce is going to be garlic. All right. I use 10 cloves of garlic for 2 28-ounce cans. All right. It may sound like a lot, but we don't put it in raw. All right. We're going to cook it with this technique that I'm about to show you that I'm telling you, you will kind of change your Italian food, because once you learn how to make this one technique, it can be used for anything. You can use this sauce for your pizza, for eggs in the morning, to make puttanesca, to make bolognese, to make lobster fra diavolo, like whatever it is you want to use. This can be your base tomato sauce. All right. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to ask you. Oh, we got a question already. Go ahead.
Chef, before we get started, somebody's asking to tell us about your famous cookies from your restaurants there.
The famous cookies. Well, those are the 10-minute cookies. And it's actually a fun story. I was at a really well-known restaurant in New York. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we ordered I was with my brother and sister having lunch, and we ordered the cookie plate, and the cookie plate came out, and it was just kind of cold cookies on a plate, and it was just like, well, all right, I don't get it. And the next day I came into the restaurant and told my pastry chef that I wanted to make a cookie plate that people would actually talk about. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, my mom used to make the cookies, and they would sit on the counter next to the oven. I would, just kind of get on my tippy toes and try to grab the cookies as soon as they came out of the oven, or at least a couple minutes, as soon as they were cool enough that I could grab them. And that bite of that hot cookie was like, to me, the best thing in the world. So we decided at the restaurant that we're actually going to bake the cookies when people order them, so that when they come out to the table, they're still hot and beautiful and gooey in the center. So we named them 10-minute cookies, which is kind of ironic because we're about to make 10-minute tomato sauce. Maybe I have a thing for 10 minutes. I don't know. All right. So the first step, guys, is going to be to slice the garlic as thin as you possibly can. All right. I can take, for example, 5 or 6 cloves of garlic, line them all up, and do them at the same time. For you guys, I want you to start with just 1 clove, and I want you to slice it as thin as you can, being careful with what you're doing. All right. Now, this is a very important part. And, I'm going to say this again a couple times throughout this thing. If you don't have great knife skills, right now is the best time in the world to kind of learn things that you might not be good at. All right. So if you wake up every morning, just like you're doing your push-ups or your sit-ups or whatever it is that you're doing for exercise, maybe go into the kitchen and, work on things like slicing garlic. After you're done doing your calisthenics, go in the kitchen, take out 10 cloves of garlic, and practice each clove until you get good enough to do 2, and then until you get good enough to do 3, and then 4, as many as you can, depending on the size of your hands. All right. It's funny too. The other night I was actually watching. I'm sure you guys are all watching some classic movies out there, and I was flipping through, and Goodfellas was on, and I was like, I haven't seen this in a while. I'm going to watch Goodfellas. And I'm not even joking. As I, clicked on the movie, it was the scene where they're all in prison, and it's Paulie slicing the garlic with a razor blade. And Henry is, speaking, and he's explaining that the reason that Paulie slices the garlic with a razor blade is because he wants to get it so thin that the garlic actually melts into the sauce. And I don't know if that's where I got this idea. It's very possible. I've been cooking for a long time, so I get my ideas from different places. But when he said that, I was like, oh my God, like this is too weird. And I knew I was going to be here tonight doing this. So anyway, so you've got your garlic sliced. Again, if you're still trying to catch up, it's okay. Just kind of pay attention and, catch up when you can. But we're going to take extra virgin olive oil. And I know you've probably read or you've probably been told that you don't cook with extra virgin olive oil. And in general, that's kind of true because, it's usually used for finishing. But because this is going to stay in the sauce and become part of the sauce, we're going to use it to cook. So this stage right here is probably the most important part of the entire demonstration. All right. If you mess up the sauce, we're going to have to start all over again. Because this is literally the backbone for the whole thing. Cold pan, turn the heat on, add the garlic and the oil, and let it come up together, okay? Give it a shake so that the garlic is spread out in one layer. All right, we're gonna do this on medium heat while we do the next step. All right, do not preheat the pan, okay? If you preheat the pan, put the oil in and throw the garlic in there, it's gonna fry, burn, and you're over and you gotta start from scratch, okay? We got a question ready?
Hey, Mark, question is, do you cook with your son? Because there's somebody out there that has a 3-year-old who's very excited to watch you make these meatballs tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Do I cook with my son? So, my son's only 15 months old, but he loves getting in the kitchen with me and having fun. If you go on my Instagram, you'll see, he's helped me make pizza dough already. He likes to whip the eggs. When we make meatballs, I give him some of the meat. I got to be a little careful because he likes to eat it raw, but at the end of the day, I love steak tartare anyway. So, but yes, emphatically yes. I want you guys to get the family in when you're making this. Again, I went back to when I was talking about why I think meatballs to me and my family are so nostalgic is because when it was time to make the meatballs, like we all came in and we helped make them. I'll get back to that later, but yes, emphatically, please get your 3-year-old in there, and especially for this part, all right? Because if you're a kid, this is fun, all right? So I take the San Marzano tomatoes. I like to use the whole peeled canned tomatoes, all right? And I like to crush them with my hands, all right? And, for me, Italian food is all about kind of tradition and love and soul, and it's recipes passed down from generation to generation, from my grandpa to my father to my mother. I'm going to pass them on to my family as well. And when I was in Italy helping make one of my first pomodoros, I was probably like 20 years old. My first proper pomodoro in Italy. I asked if I could help make it, and they said, sure, go crush the tomatoes. And I grabbed a knife, and, they all kind of got, excited, and no. And then they very kindly just kind of explained to me that, this is the part of the sauce where you kind of connect to what's going on. And, that's kind of stuck with me forever, because Italian cooking in general, when you're making pasta or bread or gnocchi or all those types of things, you're always using your bare hands and you're kind of feeling what's going on, right? So get your 3-year-old son right now, make sure his hands are clean, dump those tomatoes into a bowl, and everybody start crushing. This is where you have some fun, you're kind of connecting with each other, connecting with the tomatoes, connecting with the sauce. That's to me one of the most beautiful parts of cooking is having this kind of connection. You get a question?
Mark, we're just circling back. Somebody asked, do you ever microplane garlic?
I mean, the question is, have I ever microplaned garlic? I have microplaned garlic before in my life, for sure. For this recipe in particular, I like to slice the garlic because we slowly kind of toast it in the oil. So I still want it to kind of have like the pieces of garlic at the end of it. You'll see at the end of the sauce. If I'm adding raw garlic to something, then I'll use like a microplane for sure. But it comes out so fine that if you cook it at that point, it's going to cook like that. But again, try it. If it works for you, go for it. All right, so I have another question here on the board, but I'm just going to give pause on that question. So this is a very important part. I've got my tomatoes crushed. The garlic is now toasted in the oil. Your whole house is going to smell like garlic, roasted garlic. If your family's not helping, they're going to come in at this point, trust me. Now, off the heat, because you don't want to have any splatter, and pour away from you the tomato. All right, and then back on the heat. But make sure you do all that off the heat and pour away from you. I'm just going to rinse my hands off real quick. All right, and the reason we do that off the heat and pour away is because when hot oil mixes with water or tomato juice, right, it kind of splatters up. So you want to make sure that you're not getting any splatter, especially if you have the kids around. Now we're going to mix this just to incorporate everything. I hope you have a wooden spoon. If you don't have a wooden spoon, after this demo, please go get one just to use to make the tomato sauce. We're going to season a little bit, salt, pepper. And I know we have a question. Just give me 1 sec. And and this is good that I'm showing you this, right? Today, I couldn't get my hands on basil. I went to the store. They didn't have it. My garden is out of basil. I think it's because it's too cold. So I grabbed the next best thing that I had in my garden, which is oregano. And that leads me to letting you guys know, like, look, if you don't have basil, use oregano. If you don't like basil, use parsley. Like, it's okay. It's up to you. So I'm going to sub out for basil, just a sprig of oregano, right into the sauce the same way I would have done with the basil. All right, what's the question?
Chef, you have any tips when buying olive oil? Anything special you look for, whether expensive, cheap?
Well, when I'm buying the extra virgin olive oil, if I'm going extra virgin, you want something that's pure, and what I mean by that is it's not blended. Like for example, this one is a first cold press out of Calabria. If you read it, it's kind of like wine, right? You'll see the things on the bottom, and it's not like blended ones are terrible, but they're a little more expensive. But these are the extra virgin ones. These are perfect cold pressed for finishing. You drizzle it on almost anything, and it'll make it taste better. While I'm doing this, kind of a shameless plug for my buddy, but this company, Trey Olive, you'll see it on my Instagram if you ever go on it. They're out of Massachusetts, but their family is from Calabria, and it's legitimately some of the best olive oil. They have olive products. They have bruschetta. They have tapenade. They have crushed olives. They sent me a care package right when this whole thing started, and it's been a lifesaver. So, all right. So next, we're going to take a sip of our drink. Again, cheers, everybody. We're going to get started on the meatballs, but we're still not going to do anything with the meat yet. What we're going to do now, actually, I want you guys to do now. I want everybody to grab or make sure that you have all your mise en place or all your ingredients ready for the meatball. All right, so let's make sure that you have all your meat. You've got your eggs, the cheeses, a little bit of parsley. I want to make sure you have an onion, some garlic. Grab some thyme if you have it. Flour, the extra virgin olive oil like we just talked about. And again, if you have the basil, that's great. I'm going to sub that out with a little oregano. All right, so I hope everybody's got everything. And while this is going on, I just want to make sure that I kind of talk about our sauce, right? It's on low heat. It came up to a boil. I turned it all the way down as low as your stove will let you turn it. And now we're just going to let it simmer for the next 10 minutes. Hence the name 10-minute tomato sauce. All right. So, one of my favorite things to show people who cook at home is this next part here. So, obviously I eat at people's houses, and, when I eat at people's houses, for whatever reason, they get a little, I don't know, intimidated, like, oh, he's a chef, like, oh, sometimes they don't even want me in the kitchen. Sometimes they invite me in the kitchen. I always tell them to relax regardless. But I always find, there's a couple things with home cooks, seasoning, salt and pepper, I think is a big thing, because people forget that salt and pepper is in recipes if the recipe doesn't say salt and pepper. And something technique-wise is the chopping of an onion. Sometimes I'll walk into a kitchen and, they'll have a bandana on and 3 knives chopping the board, going crazy, and there's onions flying all over the place and people are crying. And I'm going to show you guys the chef trick, right? Chefs probably peel and chop their weight in onions almost every day. So you're going to start with an onion. Okay, you're going to cut it in half. And there's going to be the root side, right, and the top, okay? We're going to just shave the top off. And while we're doing that, grab a little bit of the paper at the same time. And then the whole thing just peels. See that? We're left with the paper. The paper goes in the garbage. And now you have a half an onion. All right? So now this is the chopping part, okay? The way that onions are set up, if you just go 6 or 7 times this way, depending on the size of the onion, then give or take double the amount of times down, so 12 or 14 times this way. Then you turn it back the original way and just go down. And again, it's give or take 6 times. Sounds stupid, but I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. All right? So you've got the onion. I now have the root facing away from me, and I'm going to go this way. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, it's still facing away from me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right. Now I'm going to take the root and I'm going to turn it to my left. If you're left-handed, just flip everything backwards. All right. I have a left-handed brother, so I understand. Gets confusing sometimes. All right. And now with the root away from me, away from the knife, I'm cutting down 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right? And what you're left with is the onion and its root and an entire half of an onion chopped. I always like to run the knife through it just one time because sometimes there's stragglers. And that's it. Okay, the onion is chopped. There was no stress. As a matter of fact, it was actually very peaceful. We set this aside. You can save this for stocks and whatnot. And that's it. Okay, we got a question?
Chef, circling back to the sauce real quick, how much salt is supposed to go in there?
Just a pinch. How much salt is the question? Just a pinch of salt goes in there, guys. All right, it's going to continue to cook, and we're also going to be seasoning the meatballs and seasoning it at the end just to make sure that it tastes good. So you can always add more at the end. If you add too much salt when you're making a sauce in the beginning, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have to add more tomato or thin it down with stock or water. So season lightly in the beginning. All right, so now with the garlic, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to use a smaller knife because the garlic is smaller, but it's the same thing. This way, this way, this way. Okay? Another thing while we're doing these onions, if you notice, right, I just peeled an onion, I just chopped an onion, and I'm not crying. And people ask me all the time, well, what's the remedy for being able to peel onions and shallots without crying? And I've heard a bunch of different wives' tales. I've heard you put matchsticks in your mouth. I've heard goggles. I've heard stand on one foot. I've heard yell. I've heard sing. I've heard a couple different things. But the only thing that I've found that truly works is just to breathe out of your mouth instead of your nose. All right. So if you're starting to cry, open your mouth and take a deep breath. Come back to the cutting board and make sure you're breathing out of your mouth. We got a question, guys?
Yeah, Chef. Is there any special process for freezing these meatballs or the sauce to save for later?
Yeah. So, whenever I'm making Italian food in general, whether I'm making meatballs or pasta or, lasagna or something like that, I usually make more sauce than I need, and I usually make more meatballs than I need, or whatever it may be. They refrigerate well and they freeze well. All right. So, I like to leave them in the pot overnight. And then the next morning I'll divide whatever I'm going to put in the fridge that I think I'll probably eat in the next couple days. And then whatever I think I might save for a rainy day, I just put them in a Ziploc bag and throw them in the freezer with a little bit of sauce. All right. So we've got our onions and our garlic here. And again, I'm trying to move slowly. I hope you guys are keeping up. We're going to take just a little bit of blended oil. We don't need to use extra virgin here because it's not going to be incorporated into the finished sauce the way the extra virgin was. But the same kind of technique, we're going to cold pan and we're going to add the onions and the garlic now. All right? And the reason we're doing that is because we're not trying to caramelize anything. We're just trying to sweat it. So you might read in recipes sometimes where the chef says, sweat the vegetables. So vegetables are made up of almost entirely water. So when you start them in a cold pan and this process, and then you gently heat them up, they release their liquid and you end up sweating them in their own water, essentially. All right? And again, I'm gonna turn the heat down here. It's one thing too with home cooks that I see, they don't play with the knobs enough, okay? Turn it up, turn it down, it's okay. It doesn't have to be full blast the whole way. You got a question here?
Chef, is it harder to cook on TV or in a restaurant?
Is it harder to cook on TV or in a restaurant? I think the simple answer to that should be it's harder to cook in a restaurant because at the end of the day, if you mess up on TV, who cares, right? If you mess up in the restaurant, people ain't coming back to your restaurant. But for me personally, I like to enjoy what I'm doing, whether I'm on TV or in the restaurant. So, I enjoy doing both for different reasons. All right. So while this is cooking, we're going to take that time that we talked about. If you already picked it, great. If you didn't, I'm sure you've all done this kind of thing, but you just grab it from the top, pinch it gently, pull down, and the leaves come right off, and you're left with the stem. Okay? Just do a couple sprigs. I love using thyme in the meatballs. It wasn't something that was in one of my original recipes, but I worked for a great French chef who actually has some Italian in him, Laurent Tourndal, and he was the one that introduced me to putting some fresh thyme in the meatballs. So thank you, Chef. We've got another question here.
Yeah, real quick. How hot should the meatball pan be? Did you say medium?
The pan that I'm cooking the onions in right now, I started with a cold pan, turned it up to high, added the onions and the garlic, and then I turned it down to medium. And right now it's just like slowly cooking right now. Now I just ran my knife through the thyme. Doesn't need to be chopped fine. It's just like a quick little chop. And I'm going to add the thyme right to the pan. All right, just give it a stir. And you can see right now, when the onions are soft, that's when they're done. And this is already done. And there's no magic camera, right? I just did this right in front of you. All right, that's it. I'm going to turn those off, let them kind of cool for a second while we get to the next step. Okay? You got another question?
Yeah, Chef. Do you know the secret ingredient on Iron Chef ahead of time?
Do I know the secret ingredient on Iron Chef? It's a great question. I wish I did. But the way that they do it is they give you a bunch of different ideas of what it could be about a week before. And the reason they do that is so that you can say, okay, well, if it's this, can you please put this in the pantry? If it's this, if it's this, if it's that. But you don't know exactly what it is until until the chairman raises the podium. And then at that point, it's legitimately 60 minutes. People ask me that all the time. I promise you, they don't stop the clock. You can't call timeouts. There's no fake for TV stuff. It's 60 minutes running around, making those dishes for the judges. And, if you mess up, you gotta figure out how to fix it real quick. And you got 7 cameras on you, following you everywhere you go too. All right, so I like my meatballs a little cheesy, no pun intended. I think in today's world, there's so much information out there. There's so much social media and everybody talking and this and the other thing. And I think meatballs have had their heyday, had their moment. And everybody talks not just about the flavor of a good meatball, but it's also the texture. So to get a nice, kind of soft, tender meatball, I'll use the word moist, but people don't like that word for some reason. My wife hates it. I don't know why. But I like to add these 3 different cheeses, which helps the texture and the overall kind of tenderness of the meatball. So we add ricotta. This is Parmesan. And then we're going to use Pecorino Romano. All right. Parmesan and Pecorino Romano are similar. I think Pecorino has a little more saltiness, a little more earthiness. Parmesan's a little more sweet. If you don't like either one of them, you can omit. If you don't like ricotta, omit it. It's completely up to you when you guys are making this, guys. I'm going to say that again and again and again. All right. We got a question out there?
Yeah, we're just double checking that onion, garlic, and thyme is still on the heat, right?
No, so the onion, garlic, and thyme is in the pan, but there's no heat now. I turned it off when my onions got soft. For me, it was probably 3 or 4 minutes ago. So you're really just looking for texture. It's not necessarily a time thing. No pun intended with the time. Like I said, you just want the onions to be nice, soft, translucent, and cooked. All right? And as we're talking about that, add a little salt and pepper to your onion mixture before you add it to the rest. All right? So it's still in the pan. I just added a little salt and pepper so that they're nice and seasoned when they go in there. All right, so we've got our 3 cheeses right now. We're going to add the eggs. All right, I'm going to put a little chopped parsley in there. I think for me, the chopped parsley came definitely from my childhood and from my mom making the meatballs. She used fresh parsley, and then she also used if you guys remember, the Progresso seasoned Italian breadcrumbs, which I still use to this day. We actually have a recipe at Peasant that we use that we call Progresso breadcrumbs. They're homemade, but we were aspiring to get the flavor to be the Italian seasoned Progresso breadcrumbs. All right, so we've got the 3 cheeses, we've got the parsley, we've got the egg. All right, we're now going to add the onion, garlic, and the thyme mixture. All right, I'm going to add a pinch of red pepper flakes. You don't have to if you don't want to. All right, we're going to grab a whisk, and we're going to whisk this just like you're making like a batter. All right, like a pancake batter. All right, and the reason I like to do this first before we add the meat is so that when we do add the meat, everything kind of gets like evenly dispersed throughout the meatball. All right. right? If you add the meat and then add the cheese and everything like that, you're really going to have to work everything to get everything incorporated. This is a great way. And if you're looking in your bowl now, right, all the parsley is everywhere. All the different cheeses are everywhere. So you don't have one meatball that has more Parmesan or one meatball that has less Parmesan. Everything's kind of the same. It's kind of like another Martin Scorsese film, Casino, when he wants the exact same amount of blueberries in the muffin. I don't know if you remember that scene. Maybe I'll watch that tonight. All right, so now we finally, a half hour in with the meatball demo, we're going to add the meat, okay? I like to use beef, pork, and veal, all right? Again, you don't have to. You can use whatever you want. I've made this exact recipe with turkey, and it comes out amazing. If you don't eat pork, don't use the pork. Add more beef and veal. If you don't like veal, add more beef and pork, like all those kinds of things. I like to add beef, pork, and veal because I think they all help with texture, flavor. They all bring a little something to the party, all right? This goes in. And then this is a cool trick here, guys. You don't have to do this, obviously, but the reason that I do this part is because the next step where we're going to make the meatballs, you want to have kind of clean, dry hands. So this kind of helps you to skip a step of having to wash your hands because you mix it with a fork, all right? So you're going to take a fork, you're going to take your mixture, and you're just going to whip it, all right? So we got a question, guys?
Yeah, Chef, we're catching some people up here. How much pecorino and Parmesan did you add?
It's equal parts. Again, off the top of my head with your recipe, I believe it's a half a cup each.
I think the recipe said 1 cup, but I'm going to check and I'll let them know in the chat. And then number 2, you added the onion mixture with the oil and everything included when you dumped that in there, right?
Everything went in. And I even used the spatula to kind of clean the pan. So like everything came out. All right, and now we're gently mixing this with the fork. You don't want to overwork the meatballs or else you're going to get a tough kind of dry meatball. All right, once you see everything kind of mixed like this, all right, let's not forget we're going to add a little more salt and pepper one more time. All right, and then this is an extremely important part, that I tell everybody when they're making this recipe. We're going to taste it. All right, and the reason you do this is because, you have to taste your mixture before you make a dozen meatballs. If not, you might be sitting at the table and you taste the meatball and you're like, this thing needs more salt, or I should have added more cheese, or I should have put more black pepper. But once you're eating them, it's too late. Right now is the only time that you have to get the meatball seasoned exactly the way you want it. No pressure, right? No pressure. All right, so we just add a little bit of oil, and then we're basically just going to make a tiny little hamburger. All right? And when I say tiny, I mean a tiny little hamburger. All right, fits in the palm of your hand. Okay? Don't season this with salt and pepper because the reason we're doing this is to see if we have enough seasoning. Okay? You get the pan hot. Should hear a sizzle when you put it in. And while we're doing this, we're going to get the setup for the next step. And while this is happening too, so I just turned off my tomato sauce, right? It was give or take 10 minutes, maybe 15. And I'm going to put it aside so that we can use this for the next step. I see a question, guys?
Yeah, Chef, when restaurants open back up everywhere, which restaurant will you visit first, besides your own?
What restaurant am I going to go to first? That's such a good question. Honestly, I don't. I think I'd probably just grab my wife, and her and I will walk down the block, and we'll go to either Juban or Tiapol. Both just walking distance from my house. Again, I think the thing that I miss the most is just that, the option of looking at my wife and saying, hey, let's grab the kid and go grab a quick bite. So, I also live above the Mermaid Inn, like Mermaid Inn, Tiapol, Juban, something in my neighborhood, just to sit down and have that feeling again. For you guys, if you're living in New York, I hope it's going to be restaurant work for June or peasant. All right, so now we've got our meatball or a hamburger. We're good to go.
Hey, Mark, just to confirm, nobody should be eating raw meat, correct?
I don't think there's anything wrong with eating the raw meat. Like I said, it's like a steak tartare. Go for it. When my brother was a kid, I didn't eat it when I was a kid, but when my brother was a kid, he used to eat the raw meat. He seems all right. He's the left-handed one, so he's a little backwards anyway. Okay, so this is a fun little tip, okay, guys? So I know in your recipe, I believe it says to put the flour on a plate, roll the meatballs, and then put them on the floured plate. So we're just going to flip it around a little bit, all right? So I want you to take your floured plate, have another clean plate, and we're going to dust our hands before we make the meatballs, all right? Kind of like LeBron James when he does the powder in his hands and he does that poof. If you've got kids around, they can do this. This is that part of the game. All right, so you're going to dust your hands. All right, and this is just flour, a little bit of salt and pepper. You're going to use that fork that we used to mix the meatball, and you're going to go right into your hand. And because your hands are floured, the meatball literally picks up all the flour that was on your hand, and now your meatball is coated in the flour, and your hands are clean, right? And you just stick it back in the flour before each one, okay? And this is definitely the part, guys. If you have little ones in the house, this is where you get them involved. I mean, they're going to love sticking their hands in the flour and, grabbing the meat. When I was a kid, my brother and I, this is the part that we would help with as well, and then we'd all sit at the table and, once the sauce came out, you'd kind of look in the pot and you'd try to figure out which meatball you made, and fight over it. And, I used to always stick my thumb in mine so that I could tell or prove to my little brother that this one's actually mine. And again, this is, as I was talking about before, like with Italian cooking, this is where, the whole family can get together, you have teenagers, or it doesn't, they don't have to be little kids. We're all in the house together right now anyway. Grab everybody and get in the kitchen, have some dinner, have an hour or two where you're making some food, all the Netflix and the video games and all that kind of stuff. That'll be there. It'll be there for the next 22 hours of the day, right? We got a question, guys?
Yeah, Chef. Can we skip the flour, or can we use gluten-free flour if need be?
Yes, you can definitely use gluten-free flour. Use rice flour. I use rice flour when I'm baking to dust my hands. It's a finer powder, and 100%. Yes. All right, so I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I already know that my pan is not going to hold more than this. So it looks like I would have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, probably about between 10 and 12 meatballs. All right. And this is also a cool little technique, all right? Dust them in flour one last time, and then you rub them together. It picks up any little pieces of meat that may be on your hand before you go to wash them, all right? All right. Next step is we're finally going to get these things in a pan, okay? So at home, if you're following me right now, I am using a saute pan, but the reason that I'm using a saute pan is so that you guys can see what I'm doing, all right? If you're at home, I implore you to use, if you have a Dutch oven or if you have a pot, something that can hold as many of the meatballs as possible. So if you have one that can hold a dozen meatballs, get it out of the cupboard and get it on the stove, okay? We're gonna preheat the pan, okay? I know before we were starting in a cold pan, right? So there we go, pans. There we go. All right, so I know before we said that we were starting them in a cold pan, adding the ingredients to that so that they sweat. This is the exact opposite, okay? We want to get caramelization now. So we're gonna add the oil and heat it up before we add the meatball. You actually wanna get even like a little bit of smoke in. All right? So, I just used the word caramelization. So before, we were sweating the onions, we were sweating the garlic. This is adding caramelization. So like if you want to do caramelized onions, for example, you chop the onions or you slice the onions, you get the pan hot first, and you add the onions to that. That's the difference between sweating and caramelizing. All right, we've got our balls here. And again, you're going to wait and watch because you want to get that kind of smoke, all right? And one final time, okay, guys? I am using a pan. If you're at home and you're keeping up right now, grab a pot that will hold all of your meatballs, okay? All right, and again, the flour was seasoned. You have salt and pepper inside the meatballs. You don't need to add more seasoning right now. All right, this pan looks like it's ready to go. So when I put the meatballs in the pan, I literally put them in order so that I know when it's time to flip them, which one I flip first and which one I flip last. So right now we're gonna go kind of counterclockwise, right? This is 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I think we can get one more in there. Yeah. All right. And now I can see instantly that there's already a little caramelization starting. So once they go in, just turn the heat down a little bit. If you don't see that sear right away, turn the heat up and don't touch them. It's a very important part. Like right now, I'm not touching. I'm just looking. You can see the brown edge starting. If you shake the pan right now or try to move them, you could release the juices and you're going to screw up the searing. We got a question out there?
Yeah, Chef. Sauce or gravy? What do you call it?
Sauce or gravy. My grandfather called it gravy, but he almost did it tongue in cheek. We all call it sauce, but I will never argue it or make fun with somebody if that's what they want to call it. All right, so while your meatballs are getting that sear, I want you guys to take a drink of whatever you're drinking. Now, this is where the time or the clock that I was talking about comes into play. You ready? So now I know which one was 12 o'clock, right? Again, if you're in your pot, you're going to go into your pot and do this as well. So now 12 o'clock, we're going to flip it on its side. 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. All right, and if you have 10 meatballs or 12 meatballs in there, just set them up so that you know. If you have to go inside too, but just make sure you know which one went first. All right? All right, so right now everybody should have their meatballs seared on one side. And then you know what? I'm actually going to show you. Because sometimes people ask me, when are they seared properly? You guys see that? All right, you've got a nice little crust. You're adding flavor to the pan, which is probably, in my opinion, the most important part of this whole thing. Yes, your meatballs are going to taste good at the end because they're seared, but we're also creating a kind of layer of flavor that is going to go into the sauce. All right, so now we're going to start at 12 again. And go right around the clock. All right, and obviously your meatballs are round, so you don't have to get around every single piece of the meatball. You want to turn it like 3 or 4 times, get a nice sear around. And while this is happening, just grab like a small pot or a coffee cup, or depending on what size you're working with right now. I'll show you why in a second. All right, so while this is happening, I want to talk to you guys about the polenta. Okay, so the polenta is going to be the third and final recipe that we work on together. So make sure you have out, or go get if you need to, the chicken stock, some milk, your rosemary sprigs, obviously the polenta. I forgot the polenta a couple times in my life when I'm going to make polenta. A little bit of butter, some Parmesan, and a little bit of salt. All right? Buddy, you can bring it. Okay. So I told you might get a little sunny side of you. Yes. Yes. You say hi? It's hot. That's the sign for hot. He knows that. Hot. Look, you see yourself over there? Hot. Yes. Hot. Okay, go back to mama. Mama. All right, we're going to turn the meatballs one last time. Yeah, he loves being in the kitchen. So like now that we just teased him with being in the kitchen for a little bit, he's not going to be happy that we took him out. All right, so now we've got the meatballs seared. We're going to grab a plate, and we're going to take the meatballs out of the pot. I know it sounds odd, but you'll see why we do this in a second, okay? So the meatballs come out, again, in the order that you put them in. You've got them seared all the way around, and you're going to be left with quite a bit of fat in your pot, right? So very carefully, I want you to take the fat and get rid of it into a smaller pot, a coffee cup, a sauce boat, like whatever it is that you might have. And then the meatballs are going to go right back into the pot. Okay? At this point, you then bring the tomato sauce back into the equation. All right, so if you're at home and you just did this in a pot, this is the point where you're going to take the lid, put the pot on top, and let this go for, I would say at least an hour. It's up to you how long you want to let it go. I mean, you can eat these right now. I mean, they're pretty much cooked. But I find that at least an hour to get them to be like that beautiful, nice and tender. And I think they'll only get better as you let them cook, as long as you're letting them cook slowly. All right. It should literally be, when you're working with tomato sauce, it can be like napalm if you don't handle it the right way. You just want to turn the heat down to as low as you can. You want to see a little bit of bubble, put the lid on, and forget about it. All right. We got a question?
Yeah, Chef. Do you prefer cast iron or carbon steel for your cookware?
At the restaurant, we use both. We use cast iron when we're dealing with certain things, like sometimes some of the steaks, or we want to get like a different type of sear on a vegetable or some fish. But for the every use, like everyday use pans, we use the carbon steel, and the all-clad saute pans are what we use in the restaurant, and what I'm using right now. These are stainless steel. All right, so polenta. Obviously, I just gave you guys a recipe, but I want to make sure that I'm very clear on this. Polenta is more about technique than it necessarily is about recipe, because everybody's tastes are a little different, all right? For this one in particular, serving it with these meatballs, I like to add a little bit of rosemary as, I don't know, kind of like a nice hint of it. I like when I'm doing like cooked meats, like, I'll baste something in rosemary, or, I don't usually chop rosemary fresh. Every once in a while I will, but for the most part, I usually like to infuse it into something. And this is the best way to infuse it into something. So we're going to take the whole sprig of rosemary, put it into the pot with the milk and the stock, all right? And we're literally just gonna bring this up. We're gonna add a pinch of salt and no black pepper when we're making the polenta, okay? And the reason for that, I don't think the flavor would mess it up too much, but I think it's almost more of like a visual thing. Like, it looks so beautiful and yellow and clean and light and fluffy when it's done, that like I don't think you need the black specks of pepper in there. I feel the same way about when I'm making mashed potatoes. Mashed potatoes, I usually just season with salt, all right? So now I see it's starting to simmer already. I'm gonna add just a little bit of butter. And that, to me, again, is just for flavor. It adds like a nice kind of richness to the finished polenta. All right, so again, salt, rosemary, milk, stock. If you're a vegetarian, don't use chicken stock. You can use vegetable stock. You can use water. You can use all milk if you want. You guys just got to meet Sonny. One of Sonny's favorite breakfasts is this exact same polenta, but we cook it in almond milk instead of milk and stock. And he loves it. We fold in blueberries and drizzle a little honey. Never mind, he loves it. I love it too. It's fantastic. All right, so I see this starting to come up. Got to be careful when you're working with milk or heavy cream or any of these types of things, because when it gets hot, they will rise, okay? If you walk away at the wrong time, you'll come back and it'll be all over your stove. You got a question?
Yeah, Chef, just checking in on those meatballs again. How long do you think it should be on each side as you're rolling them?
It's probably, give or take, 30 seconds to a minute. As long as your pan is nice and hot, they should never stick. If they're sticking, just kind of turn the heat up a little bit. But it's probably 30 seconds to a minute on each side. And then once you get a nice sear just about all the way around them, remember, we then take them out of the pot, drain the fat out of the pot, put the pot back on, and dump the meatballs back in. Then the sauce. Cover and forget about it at the lowest possible heat for at least an hour. If you have time, do it for a couple hours. And when you're done eating them, leave whatever's left in the pot overnight. All right, so now we've got the milk and the cream, sorry, the milk and the stock infused, and it's hot and it's ready. We take the polenta out. We take the rosemary out, all right, and just discard it, okay? You're gonna grab a whisk, and again, going back to technique, right? If you're doing this with almond milk or whatever it may be, this is the technique part. It's 3-part liquid, 1 part polenta, and you whisk in after you heat up the liquid, all right? So now we're gonna take about a cup. I added a cup and a half of stock each over here. Again, you're going 3 to 1. And the reason you whisk it in like this is so that you don't get stuck with lumps in your polenta. All right, and at this point, it should be low heat. I talked about tomato sauce can act like napalm sometimes if you don't treat it the right way. Polenta, if you have it at a high heat, it'll just congeal, get hot, and the bottom will burn, all right? Low heat. Make sure you give it a stir every once in a while. Make sure the bottom is not sticking, okay? We got a question?
Yeah, Chef, we're just confirming the ratio for the milk and the chicken stock is a 1-to-1, whatever they're making for their amount, right?
Chicken stock to milk is 1-to-1. If you add 2 cups of each, or we'll keep it simple. If you do 3 cups of each, that'll be 6 cups. So it would be 2 cups of polenta. And that'll make enough for 4 to 6 people. Right, and then depending on your polenta, I like to use this one when I'm cooking at home. At the restaurant, we have different grits that could take hours to cook. This cooks in a couple minutes, and it comes out great. It's delicious. And again, this guy, Bob, has a lot of different products that are incredible. He has great rices, great grains. He has gluten-free stuff. I get this at Whole Foods. All right, our polenta is here, or it's just about there. Our meatballs are just about there. So we're coming towards the end here. Before I get to finishing this thing, I want to know if you guys out there have any questions about anything so far, or you're not somewhere where you need to be and you're not sure where you need to go. All right, the floor is open.
Hey, Chef, real quick, somebody's asking a question about what type of wood do you cook with if you're cooking pheasant?
What type of wood do we cook with at pheasant? We get oak, and it comes from New Jersey, believe it or not. We get a pallet probably twice a week, depending on the weather. We dry it for a couple days. That's also the beauty of the type of cooking that we do at Peasant. It's wild, natural. On days when we didn't have enough time to dry the wood, the food comes out a little slower. And on days when the wood is really dry, the food comes out a little quicker. I mean, it's kind of always keeping you on your toes. And that's like cooking on wildfire. So, I miss it. Can't wait to get back in there. I really can't. On Easter Sunday, we dug a hole outside in my parents' backyard, and we built a fire, and we cooked on the open fire. And I remember, just that smell of like roasting meat on an open fire, and it just brought me right back into the kitchen over there. All right, so just in that amount of time, the polenta is cooked. We're going to taste it for seasoning. All right, this is also very important, right? We're going to taste everything for seasoning. We're going to taste the sauce. We're going to taste the polenta. We've already tasted the meatball. See, it actually needs a little salt. Now, keep in mind, when you're tasting for seasoning, right? You don't need the polenta to be overly seasoned because you're going to have other elements with it, right? So keep that in mind, okay? Like a nice, perfectly, we'll call it like mellow seasoning because you're gonna have the salt and the black pepper and the tomatoes and the garlic and everything going on top of it, all right? And that's with anything, right? If you're doing mashed potatoes with, a steak that has a pastrami spice on it or lots of black pepper, like keep that in mind when you're seasoning your garnishes. All right. So we're gonna take our polenta, and this is what the consistency should be. See that? It's almost like cream of wheat or mashed potatoes, as I was just talking about mashed potato. All right, and then we're gonna make a little kind of hole here. My grandpa actually used to show me to do this with polenta. He used to show me to do this with potatoes. And somebody asked before about the gravy. He would basically say, you're making a little nest for your gravy. All right, so the meatball goes in. You take a little bit of the sauce, and the sauce now falls into this hole that I just made in the polenta. All right, I like to finish it with a little fresh grated cheese. This is a 24-month Parmesan, which is an older Parmesan. Right, you guys added the basil, I added the oregano. So I like to kind of bring everything back. You have the fresh, we had the Parmesan inside the meatball, so now we're finishing it with a little fresh grated. We had the basil sprig or the oregano sprig that we put in the tomato sauce in the beginning. Now we're gonna add a little fresh to it as well, right? We've been putting salt and black pepper throughout the whole time. Now we're just gonna put a little crack. And what did we start this whole thing with? It was the extra virgin olive oil in the pot with the garlic, right? So now we're just gonna drizzle a little bit of extra virgin olive oil. All right, and if you look at this, it's just, I hope you guys can see that. If you can't, I'll try to tilt it for you, but it's just, gorgeous. And this is what I was talking about before. It's light and fluffy with the polenta. You got the tomato sauce stuck in the moat. You got that meatball with all the garnish on top. And that's it. There was no magic cameras. There was nothing magic on TV. I think Elmer Lagasse used to say it on his show years ago, like, we're making real food here. Like, this is real food. I'm going to dig in and taste. Perfect. Right? I don't know about where you are, but it's kind of a gloomy, rainy evening right now. Now that I finished my cocktail, I'll pour a glass of Chianti. I'll sit down, I'll watch a classic movie, maybe Casino. Again, guys, it was such a pleasure and an honor to have everybody here. When the world goes back to normal, I hope everybody gets back out there, gets back out supporting the restaurants. If you come to Restaurant Marc Forgione or Peasant, when you make the reservation, please let them know that we're at this demonstration together tonight. I promise I'll come out and say hello and hopefully be able to give you a real hug. All right? Stay safe, stay strong.
Chef, just so you know, we're keep this link live for a little bit so people can rewind and catch up if they need to.
Cool.
And everybody can show pictures of the dishes on social media if need be.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, guys. I kind of forgot to mention that. So tonight, when you're done making your dishes, go on Instagram and Twitter. It's at Marc Forgione. Take pictures of your finished dishes, and I'll hit you back and let you know what I think, and we'll go back at it. All right, guys. Good night.